All right. Welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to quickly introduce myself. My name is Mindy Burke. I am a career and life coach. I help information technology professionals to create more time and space for the things that matter most. And very often with my clients, how that ends up is that we often have a view of what life should look like. And we go to work on checking all the boxes. We go to school, get degrees, get good jobs, get married, buy a house, have kids, all those things. We've checked the boxes. And at the end of that time frame, we're thinking, okay, I've done all that. Now I should be happy. I should consider myself successful. And unfortunately, it doesn't always happen that way. So I am here to help my clients to tap back into what's missing and what would make life feel more passionate and more fulfilling. But today is not about me. Today is about Monica Flores. I have asked her to join me. Monica and I were co creators in a mastermind together. So we've been peers in a mastermind group in a group coaching setting. And I've learned a little bit about her. We've talked and gotten to know each other a little bit one on one. And I wanted her to be able to share with you what it is that she does, what she feels passionately about, because it is so important. So I want to allow you, Monica, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and let us know what led you to this point. What is your background?
Yes, thank you, Mindy. I really appreciate this. I love being here. I am Monica Flores. I'm the life and financial coach for multi-generational families. I help families with aging parents and growing children prosper emotionally and financially. So, a little bit about me and my background. Started off really in the financial services industry. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, more on the financial advising side, wealth management. I saw that there was a little bit of a piece missing on people trying to manage just their everyday money, because as financial advisors and wealth managers, they actually bring in people's assets and manage that. But where some of the financial literacy gap was with people in their everyday money. And so I wanted to help those types of people just to be able to balance and budget and start saving just for the little things, building up an emergency fund. So I was really looking to find something a little bit more fulfilling in that area. But at the same time, I also have a really soft spot for the elderly, because I was even on the financial advising side, we would see some of our elderly clients kind of being taken advantage of financially, whether it be through family members or even through kind of like being scammed. You know, we had one lady who was having a home contractor actually keep telling her that she had mold in her home. And she just kept writing him checks after checks after checks just for mold that really was not as bad as he was telling her. So I really do have a soft spot in my heart for the elderly to being taken advantage of, even through financial abuse is really how they consider that. So I figured I'd kind of hone in on that group. But at the same time, when I would actually start talking to people, letting them know I'm a financial coach, I always talked about the sandwich generation, which a lot of people kind of don't really hear too much of. But right now, the sandwich generation is the Gen Xers over here. And really, what the sandwich generation is, it's an inevitable type of position that you may or may not find yourself in. Eventually, you will get there. And it is the generation where you are, like you were saying earlier, you know, you've checked the boxes off and you're here and you're going and you should be happy. And so you're right there, but yet some people kind of overlook and oversee. You remember you have your parents over here. So then that kind of starts creeping in, and then your worries come back. And nobody has taught you yet how to check the boxes off for that. You have your parents, and you're worrying whether it be their health, But now you also don't know what their financial situation is either, and what's going to happen, or what are their dreams? What is their retirement going to look like? And what is it that they want as far as funerals, things like that? Have you even had that discussion? So again, like you were saying, you're at that point, you checked off the boxes, but now you have your family to actually think about and you start worrying about. But usually at this time, you have your own children too. So you're thinking about them and you're worrying about them and having to support them and having to support possibly you want to save for college and other things that you want to be able to do for them. So that's where the sandwich generation comes into play. You have your parents, you have your children, and you're possibly financially strapped right in the middle and worrying emotionally and financially about what's going to happen into this. So that's where I come in and I help guide and more importantly, prepare you for that transition. And how do you start having that conversations, not only with your parents, but also within your own home? How do you start that conversation with your spouse, making sure you're on the same page? How are we going to look at this financially? What is it going to do to us? Once you kind of build that within your home, and then you start talking to your parent or even an in-law, you start talking to them and finding out what their wishes are, making sure that they would also be comfortable if you wanted to move them in, and how is also that going to look, and start easing into the conversation about their finances and how that looks as well, so that when the time does come and you are possibly moving your parents in with you, or even if you're moving them in somewhere like an assisted living, if that's the case too, you still want to make sure that you're in a good place with every decision that is being made, and that you feel like you are making the right decision for your parents, for yourself, and for your children on how all of that actually really looks. So that's where I come in and I help facilitate that and help make sure that people are in the right minds, in the right, because there's a lot of emotions going around, and that there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of anxiety, and possibly even fear as well that I see. So,
yeah. Can you say more about guilt? Like, how does guilt show up in this particular situation for your clients?
Definitely. Guilt, that's a big one, because you feel guilty that if you're focusing on yourself and focusing on your children, that you're not being able to help your aging parent. And the guilt sets in there. You feel guilty that you're not able to do there because you're focusing so much over here. So how do you find that balance? And also possibly even just the opposite. If you're going to focus in on your parent and trying to make sure everything's okay, you're feeling guilty and not being able to serve or to be with your family over here on this side of it. So you actually are really torn between the two. Sometimes you feel like you have to make a decision between one or the other. You don't necessarily have to. So that's where the guilt actually kind of comes in and overtakes that emotion and really brings you down a little bit. So.
Okay. So if you're in that position, or one of your clients is in that position where they're feeling guilt because they feel like they're having to lean one way or the other, can you share a little bit about your philosophy on that particular scenario, and how do you help your clients to deal with that?
Well, we definitely want to hone in on where that guilt is setting.
Okay.
Where is that guilt coming from? Why are they feeling that? So we talk through that. I don't really necessarily have so much of a particular process. It's more about just talking it through and seeing why they are feeling these emotions, and what is it that we can do to change that feeling, change that emotion, change that thinking, and help them be able to not feel that guilt or shame that they might be covering themselves with on that. So it's a lot of what we do is just talking through about it, looking for other ways to not have that feel like it's a burden or a guilt that's really setting in on their shoulders. So once we can get through that and see what's popping up and being able to talk that out through, then we can move a little bit further and have that guilt come off of us.
Okay. Sounds to me like what you're saying is it's very, and I know this from like life coaching too, that it's a very individualized process because
Oh, yes.
everyone feels that guilt for different reasons. And so it
Mm-hmm.
sounds to me, if I can reframe that, what you do is you help your clients to tap into what is creating that guilt so that you can kind of work your way through it. Is that?
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. All right. So as you were talking earlier about the sandwich generation and okay, if you decide, your elderly parents or mother, or, just one of them, whatever, is going to move in with you versus moving to, some kind of a nursing home or assisted living or something like that. Is there a difference in how you would direct your clients in those two scenarios, or are they pretty similar? And what can you speak to on that?
It would be pretty similar as far as the decision that they make. It's more important of making sure that they feel that they made the right decision more than
Mm,
anything. So I don't really direct them and say one way is better than the other. We'll map out more of, okay, let's see how it's going to look. If we decide to have your parents move in with you, how does that look? How do we have that conversation? How do you see it in your family? Your family, everybody's family dynamics are different.
mm-hmm.
Do you really get along with your parent? You know, how will that feel when your parent is now living with you? Some people might believe, oh, it's going to be like I was way back in high school. They're going to want to know where I am every second of the day. So, do you really want to go back to living like you were in high school? So it's more of first finding out, okay, let's walk through these decisions. How is it going to look when your parent moves in with you at home? How does that affect your marriage? How does that affect the children? How do we set those boundaries? What kind of boundaries can we set right now, even though we don't know if they're moving in yet or not? Because you haven't made that decision yet.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about the boundaries now, so we have that laid out.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about, how do you discuss this with your spouse? How does that look like? How does it look like when you're going to talk to little Johnny or little Susie? How are they going to feel about that?
Mm-hmm.
And then how are you going to talk about it with your mother? How are they going to feel about that too? So you kind of help them paint a picture of how it's going to look and how they believe it'll look when if they do move in their parents, and also how does it look if you decide to put them in assisted living.
Mm-hmm.
How is that going to look? Are you going to be? Is it an assisted living that's going to be far? Is it going to be close? Are you going to be able to go there daily? Are you going to be able to still make some time for your parent, even though the assisted living is probably 10 minutes away of something?
Mm-hmm.
Because some people just might feel for granted a little bit later that they're not too far, but then they stop visiting.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that going to look? Also, I had it on the tip of my tongue. But definitely also including your children in that, taking them also to the assisted living, or even bringing them over for dinner. How is that really going to look like? And more importantly, how are you going to feel about that? And
Yeah.
making sure you paint that picture as well. How is that going to look like? Which one is it that now that we've laid it all out, how this is going to look like, how this is going to look like. Now you can make a clearer decision and a better decision from there.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So as you were describing, having the conversation with your kids, I just imagined having that conversation with my daughter. She's 11, and her going, "Yes, ice cream for dinner. That's awesome."
I know, right? But then you got to get into the whole thing with, wait a second. You are going to let your grandchild, my child, have ice cream. You never let me have ice cream.
How that happens.
I know. That's the best part about being a grandparent.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, and that actually happened, by the way. Like and it was, for me, it was one treat per day. That's it. And we didn't have sugar cereals, nothing like that. And then I had kids, and it was probably back when they were like 5 and 7 or 4 and 6, something like that. And they got ice cream for dinner.
Yeah.
I can't tell you what that conversation was like with my
Exactly. I was just talking with someone about how being a grandparent, it's really the best thing. And I was like, you know what? I know. And I was telling them that actually just yesterday we're having this conversation, but I remember having this conversation with my husband before we even had a child. And I said, can we just skip this whole kid thing and go straight to being grandparents? Because that looks like a lot more fun, to where you can spoil them and send them away.
That's right. Feed them up with sugar and send them home.
Yeah. And then sure enough, I had that same conversation yesterday with actually some grandparents, and they're like, oh, we just love being grandparents. I'm like, gosh, I know, that's the best thing. Why can't I just skip the whole parent thing, go straight to being a grandparent? Like, yeah, it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, unfortunately, not so much. Oh my God. So the other thing that kind of came up for me as you were talking was through my own experience. So my grandparents, toward the end of their life, they both got cancer at the same time. So, or very, very close in time period. And so preparing for, and this is another question, is that we decided as a family to try and keep my grandparents in their home. And so that was a challenging decision to make, because then what does that mean for us as the family and for care, because they were both terminally ill. So that's another thing that came up. And then as we were, my grandfather had passed away. And then we were trying to decide, okay, now grandma can't stay by herself, and we could continue in-home care, or we could, take her somewhere that she could be under constant watch 24/7. And so that's what we ended up doing. But here's where the question comes in. My grandmother, I hope my mom doesn't watch this, was a little stubborn, right? About what she felt like she was still capable of versus what was reality. And so my question to you in this whole big, long drawn out question is, how do you advise your clients when they know that there's come a point where mom or dad can't handle their own finances anymore, but mom or dad aren't willing to relinquish control yet? How does that look?
Gentle.
Okay.
You have to be gentle with it. As far as relinquishing the finances, and I usually try and tell them to really be prepared for it. So coming from, as the parent, not the grandparent per se, and you're trying to look out for your parents. When it comes to the finances, you want to make sure that you're ahead of the game. And what I mean by that is you want to make sure that you already know what banks they bank at, you have the account number, and also be a power of attorney on, not power of attorney, well, yes, it has some power, have the documentation like power of attorney already established, so that when there does come a point where the doctors might say, okay, grandma's not able to really have full control over this, or her mind's, somewhere else, start having the signs of dementia. That's where you can come in with your power of attorney and be able to take control of that. So really, a lot of those types of discussions happen early on, so that you're not so stressed about that. Sorry. So you're not so stressed about that when the time does come, and you already know what to do. So as far as the finances, it's not really like relinquishing and then you're taking full control, but as power of attorney, yes, you do have control while they are still alive. They just are not in the capacity to be able to handle it. So if you can have that conversation ahead of time, okay, mom, dad, you know, let's put myself or my brother, or my sister, or whomever, usually you want to find the most responsible financial person to be the power of attorney on, especially on the financing side.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and say, okay, when the time does come and you're not able to make any of these decisions, I will be able to do this on your behalf.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
when
How,
it
and
comes
when you
up.
say ahead of time, like, is there an age group? Is there a, like, how do you make that determination when the right time for that conversation would be?
It would definitely be when there really isn't a perfect time or a perfect age or anything like that,
Okay.
unfortunately. But I always like to have, depending on your dynamics, like with my mom and my dad, I'm like, okay, no, I'm handling everything. Y'all already know that. So it's already out there. They really don't have a decision. Exactly. Check. But depending on your family dynamic, you definitely want to have that conversation earlier enough when you're in the sandwich generation and you already see your parents starting to retire. You
Okay.
just, oh, you're starting to retire. So how what do you plan on doing for retirement? Start having that's where you kind of start the conversation. And then when it starts building from there, once you start talking and then you start hearing what your parents are talking about for their retirement, and the money conversation, depending again on your dynamic, is a tricky one. So you always have to ease into that a little bit. And it doesn't have to be all one big conversation at the dinner table or anything. It's just things that you start talking about as you're visiting with them. Like again, the first thing they're going into retirement. Ooh, what are you going to do for retirement? How does that look like? And this and that. So you have that conversation there. Now you already have an idea of what they want to do in retirement. And be like, oh, okay, so wow, and you getting a pension from that? Oh yeah, so and so we have a pension. We got the Social Security coming. Oh, that's great. Kind of like a little check mark or whatever. And then you start just kind of talking about maybe just having a little bit of conversation. But the best advice that I have is to not have it all at one time. It's can be too much on both sides. So you just want to, when it's early enough, just tiptoe into it, just little by little, until you say one day. You can even use, the best thing to do is also to use other people as examples, even though you may not have an example. Just be like, oh, remember my friend Brad and Julie? Their parents over here, they're having a hard time because they don't know what to do. He had a stroke. They don't know about where his stuff is. They're having a hard time. And then you kind of just trick your parents into having that conversation on the other side. So again, really depending on the dynamics of your family. Do you step right in there? I don't know. That's when I talk with my clients. How do you feel your parents are going to react if you say it this way?
Mm-hmm.
So if again, if you're like someone like me, nope, I'm taking care of it, done, check, whatever. Or if your parents are the type that are very resistant to having that conversation, throw in another idea over here that somebody was talking about so it can ease in and trick them into that conversation easily by giving them a different scenario, somebody else having that too.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
what do you think? Or even asking them for advice, what do you think I should do if that happened to y'all? I don't know what I'm going to do, and kind of be on that defensive side of it. Just go, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't want to end up like Brad and Julie, and they, are so stressed and they're trying to find this and trying to find lawyers and, what do you think I should do if that happened to you guys? Have them start planning that conversation as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective on it because that actually puts them in the planning stages with you. Like it's not the
Yes.
child going, we need to do this. It's, oh,
Yes.
this is what I think we should do. Yeah, I like that.
Yes. Yes. And you definitely always want to try and include your parents first in that conversation, have them coming up with a little bit of those ideas, because The biggest thing about the elderly or your parents is they don't want to be a burden. So they
Mm,
are not going to talk to you about stuff as much as they would probably, as much as they're feeling, whether it's emotionally and possibly physically, because they don't want to put their burdens on you. They don't want to put their burdens back on their children. And they're going to tell themselves, oh, well, Mindy, she has her kids that she has to worry about. She doesn't need to worry about me.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that pulls them back. But if you can bring them into the conversation, that's that's much better because they they have a lot of emotions as well to deal with by not wanting to open up and put the burden on you and have you worry about them.
Yeah, I really see that. And I have one grandparent left,
Mhm.
and like a phone call, I'll call her or she'll call me, doesn't matter. In like 3 minutes, it's like, okay, well, have a nice evening. And it's like, wait, I wasn't done talking to you yet. But I know it
Yeah.
totally comes from the I don't want to burden you, and take up your
Yeah.
time. You have more important things to do. So that's good.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh, so there was something else brewing in my head. Let me think. What was that? Oh, I'm just curious about the like move into my home scenario.
Hmm.
Eh, how frequently does something happen where, yes, we're going to take in my parents and I am solely responsible, like financially, for now the entire household versus mom or mom and dad or whatever bringing their finances into that same situation? And do you have your clients, the sandwich generation, basically counting on some kind of assistance from their parents, or is it them taking on the entire financial, I don't want to call it a burden, I don't like that word,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
the responsibility of
yeah.
that scenario?
Yes, because when you do move them in, a lot of things can change, a lot of things can happen. You're going to have more expenses, whether it be on the financial side of things, obviously on the financial side of things, but like grocery shopping or home repairs, possibly. Depending on your house and depending upon your parents, whether they have some medical issues. Maybe they're in a
Mm,
wheelchair. So now you have to make extra expenses on trying to accommodate areas for a wheelchair. Or
mm,
even what I did at my home because my father was with us for the weekend. They would come over and they would stay for the weekend. And I was kind of worried about him being in the shower. So
mm.
we had to accommodate for one of those bars, kind of like what you see in the, it doesn't really look that bad in there because I was like, I don't want it to look like a medical facility that he's coming into. But we had one of those bars put into the shower so that he could hold on to it while he
Mm-hmm.
was in there. So there's some
Yeah.
things that have to be adjusted, have to be accounted for, and there are more expenses that are going to be on that. What I recommend and what I tell my clients is you are now a bigger family and you are now a bigger household. Combining all the finances together as a household is going to be the best way to do that, and just budget it out. Like, you include that as extra money coming in and budgeting it out and making sure you're putting a little bit also towards possibly having to do some of those home repairs, depending on, you would know obviously your parents' health more so. If you feel like they may need some assistance, or we may need to make some changes or accommodations around the home for them. So you want to make sure you're putting a little bit more money towards that. But yes, in essence, you are a household, you are a big family now, taking in their money, whether it's the Social Security pensions or anything, considering that all part of the household fund.
Okay. And then is there, and I don't know, I'm totally asking from ignorance, but is there a like a percentage, or how do you determine, okay, we need to keep this bucket aside for like medical expenses? Because I imagine end of life, or toward the end of life can be very expensive. So
Yes.
how do you have your clients plan for that?
There's other things that you can do for that. Even so, if you wanted to, because I know a lot of parents, even my parents, are like, well, I don't want to burden you with all the funeral expenses or anything like that. You can actually, there's programs and the funerals where you can do prepay and actually pay ahead of time on a monthly
Ah,
basis. Yeah, pay them every month, and that's already taken care of. And so that's already done. You can even
okay.
prepay for that if you needed to. So that's a conversation that you would definitely want to have with your parent. Is it something that we can actually pull? How can we do that and just get it done and over with? I kind of advise that you probably look into something like that, because when the time does come, so many emotions are just flowing through and so many decisions they're pouring out to you. Oh, well, do we have to do this? Do we have to do that? You have your own processing of emotions that you have to go through, of the grief, and then having to have to make decisions on what when mom or dad would have liked or something. But so if you can
Mm,
have that conversation ahead of time, and maybe even already have it planned where you don't have to worry about it, that's just absolutely one best thing not to have to worry about. So that's a good thing to have, to be able to think about there. But if you don't have something like that, or if that's not happening, then yes, you want to have that other bucket per se. I always like to call them buckets on what you're saving for.
mm-hmm.
And you definitely, yeah, you would want to include that. But as far as a percentage, I hate to think of it so much as a percentage. You just do what your family can do for that.
Okay.
You know, because once you start doing your budget, um, and someone had asked me the same thing. Well, should we have a percentage of how much the parent should contribute to the groceries, or percentage? And I'm like, no, that just makes it more complicated. That's why you have the whole household fund. It all comes together, and how you budget that household fund. That way, your parent is not thinking, oh, well, I just wrote Mindy a check for groceries, and they just buy junk or this or that. So
Mm,
you don't really want your parent to feel like there's a label on the money that they're giving you, and starting to label it. Oh, well, I gave her $200 for rent, or I gave her, $150 for grocery, whatever the case may be. It's
mm-hmm.
just more of you being able to pull the money together. We're all a household, but including them also in the grocery shopping experience. Hey, mom, dad, is there something that you really like, a little snack? I'm going to make sure I'm going to go to the grocery store, or I'm shopping, whatever. Let's make sure we got what you have. And they
Mm-hmm.
don't feel so guilty, because they know they've given you money. They don't have to give you, oh, well, let me make sure I give you some money for my groceries. You don't want them to feel that way. You're already
Yeah.
taking that off. You're taking that burden off of them as well. You're just combining everything, bringing it all together, making it more cohesive and easy just to work with. And everybody is just free to do and feel and get off
Mm.
that way.
Okay. Wow, that was really could have used all of this information like 5 years ago.
Right?
Yeah, yeah. All right.
Oh.
Is there anything else that you would like to share that we haven't talked about yet?
No, actually, you had some really good questions. That's really
Okay.
great. Yeah.
Very cool. So I'm going to ask one more question, and
Mhm.
that is, how do people contact you or get a hold of you, connect with you?
Yes. You can visit my website at moneymanagementbymonica.com, and also email at info@moneymanagementbymonica.com.
Very cool. I want to
Yes.
thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time to do this
you.
with me. This is exciting, and I
I
know
know.
valuable information that there's a
Yes.
lot of people out there that don't know all
Yes.
this stuff that are ready
Yeah,
that need this
absolutely.
information. Like I said, I
Absolutely.
wish we had it a couple
Yeah.
years ago. So
Well, I
very
can't
cool.
help. I can't wait to help more people. So, yes.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Mindy.
much. I appreciate you being here.
Me too. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Have a good one.
You too.
Thanks.